Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Hot-Blooded Podcast. I'm your host, Kat Jones, and this is my podcast where I talk to musicians about love, rock and roll, and anything else that comes up along the way. And I have taken a couple of weeks off the podcast because of everything going on in the world and really wanting to take a step back and not put out any of my own work right now. I thought it was a time to sort of give space and listen and see what I can do to help, even in my tiny corner of the world. And I put out a bonus episode last week, just sort of explaining my thought process on everything, and also the fact that I'm going to start donating 20% of the Patreon money every month toward a different organization that is fighting for racial equality and also against police brutality. And this month, I have chosen the Okra Project, which is an organization that helps Black trans folks get food and shelter and whatever else they might need. They're a great organization. I was actually inspired because 2 Minutes to Late Night just did a raffle where they raffled off my friend Jordan's bass. And I looked into the organization, and given that it's Pride Month, I thought that it was appropriate, and I'm going to donate money to them. So next month, we'll probably go with a different organization, and you're always welcome to email me and give me suggestions of places that you would like to see your money go to. And in the meantime, if you feel like donating to the Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/hotbloodedpodcast, and you can get some extra stuff along the way. And again, as I mentioned last podcast, in the little bonus podcast, I am behind on some of those things, and I do need to get going on that. So forgive me. The world has been a little bit insane. I appreciate all of your patience. Anyway, this week's episode is a special one, and it is with the songwriter and vocalist of a band called Mizmor, and he goes by the name A.L.N. And Mizmor is a very interesting band to me because I'm not really much of a black metal person, and Mizmor is absolutely a black metal band. But from the first moment that I heard Mizmor, I was completely captivated. The first song I ever heard was on an album called Yod, Yodh, if you want to look it up. The first song is called Woe Regains My Substance. And the first thing you hear is just this perfect blood-curdling scream that will shake you to your very core and just moves you instantly. It's like you can just tell right away this is about something very, very heavy. So when I first heard this, I went and checked out his story. I believe this was in 2016. I started reading about his inspiration behind the music, and it turns out that he used to be a devout Christian, and he started to fall out of love with his faith and out of love with God and become more of an atheist. And as he was doing so, he started writing black metal as a way to mourn his religion and his relationship with God. And I thought that was so interesting because black metal is usually so associated with the devil and really evil things and, satanic imagery. And even if not all bands, who play black metal are into that stuff, it's just kind of the founding fathers of black metal kind of laid down that aesthetic for everything. So to hear that somebody was writing black metal about Christianity and the mourning the loss of that when you realize that God isn't real just seems so incredibly moving and interesting to me. So I've been wanting to talk to him for a long time. And then he put out this record called Cairn last year. And a cairn is a pile of rocks that you place on the ground as a mile marker or as a signifier that you've buried something. And there are 2 songs on the record with that word in it. One's Cairn to God and one is Cairn to Suicide. And basically, it served as a metaphor for putting behind him the concept of God and also the concept of suicide as a way out. So the record is about reveling in the absurdity of life and the fact that God isn't real, and also figuring out how to live your life in the present moment and enjoyment, and to just sort of accept the fact that there might not be a reason that we're here, but that's okay. So I just thought that was such a cool concept for a record. He put that record out in 2019, and recently in 2020, he released a book of this huge conversation between him and Emma Ruth Rundle, who, if you remember from episode 3, is a very good friend of mine and an amazing songwriter and poet and musician. And this conversation is like 14,000 words long or something like that. And they released just a snippet of it on Metal Hammer. And I remember reading it and wondering how these two knew each other, because they had this deep conversation that seemed so, it's the type of thing that you only get into when you really know somebody well. As it turns out, A.L.N. from Mizmor is dating Emma Ruth Rundle's sister, Sarah Ray Rundle, and they've been together for like 6 years. So I put 2 and 2 together and realized that Sarah Ray has been with A.L.N. since the loss of his religion, and she was with him while he was kind of going through a lot of these things. So I really wanted to know what that was like, what it was like to be with him while he was mourning this loss, and how she helped him through that, and what their partnership is like, and also the difference between, you know, what it's like being in a Christian relationship and one as a newly atheist person. So I had an amazing time talking to him. I'm really looking forward to you guys hearing this. He's a wonderful person, and it seems like Sarah Ray is too. So you recently released a book that's a conversation between you and Emma Ruth Rundle, like a huge epic conversation about life and religion and the absurdity of everything. How did that happen? Like, what were you guys just like, we have amazing conversations and we should just record one?
It started actually through Gilead Media gearing up to release A.L.N, the full length that I released last year. And we were coming up with ideas to, you know, how to do the PR rollout, and kind of mutually expressing dissatisfaction with kind of the regular track stream premiere through, you know, the same handful of metal sites, metal zines. And how a lot of times those reviews and premieres don't really get at the real content. It's kind of just like a surface level engagement, and they don't have the effect that you think they're going to. So Adam felt kind of strongly about this, and we wanted to come up with some more outside of the box ways to roll the thing out. We did do some track premieres, and this actually was one of them. The interview with Emma was through Metal Hammer on the internet. But basically, it was his idea for me to have a conversation with a personal friend or colleague, or someone that I know better than vaguely, to have a more personal kind of engagement, go deeper, and get a really special interview that way,
as opposed to just like some random journalist or blogger calling you up and asking you like surface level questions.
Exactly, yeah. Or maybe not even doing that and just putting the song up and typing a few comments about what they think it sounds like. And there's so much emotional, personal content to my music. I think Adam wanted to capture that better through just a less orthodox interview style, more personal one. So he threw out a couple of suggestions of people I could talk to, and then I kind of thought maybe I should talk to Emma, because we're close, and we have good conversations, and it makes sense. And she was already going to be coming out to visit me and Sarah Ray, my girlfriend. Sarah Ray is her sister, which is how I know Emma. So Emma was going to pay us a visit, and I pitched this idea to her, and she was like, "Yeah, that sounds cool. We'll wait till I get there, and we'll do the talk while I'm there. It'll be perfect." We're like, "Wow, yeah, you're actually going to be here in person. That's going to be really, really cool." Mm-hmm. So yeah, we just one of the days she was visiting, we sat down in my backyard and pressed record on the phone and set out to have this conversation interview. It turned out to be like almost 4 hours.
Wow.
Like we didn't really have any parameters in mind. I think I was assuming it would be like maybe an hour, but there was so much happening. We just kept talking and talking. And it turned out, to be really, really long. And Emma brought her camera out with her Rolleiflex, like old film camera. And she also borrowed a digital camera from her dad. She's a really, really talented photographer. And part of the interview was not only going to be getting to talk to her, but getting her to photograph me and do portraits of me. Mm-hmm. So, we went out with Sarah on a camping trip to Yachats, to Cape Perpetua.
Cool.
Which is a cool spot in Oregon where the old growth forest meets the coast.
Rad.
And she took a bunch of pictures out there. And anyway, long story short, once we had the whole thing wrapped up to give to Gilead, I had to transcribe, like 4 hours of conversation into text.
Oh, you did all the transcription yourself?
Oh, yeah. It was insane.
Oh, my God.
And we had like hundreds of pictures. So even after I like whittled it down to as small as it could be that I felt good about it, it was still insane. And so I gave it to Adam and was like, I know you're going to like cut most all of this stuff out, but like this is the smallest version I can give you. Do whatever you want. Yeah, do whatever you want with it. But I got to let you know, this thing was like a lot of work, and I feel like it was really, really special, and we went above and beyond. And so if there's like any way we can do a more special release of this, than just 1,000 words on a site that people forget about after a couple weeks, like that would be really cool, because this is a really unique thing, and Emma's really talented. These photos are incredible. So we came up with the book idea, and I'm really pleased with how it came out. It's satisfying to have something to hold and look through and read for all the effort we put in.
Yeah. I bet, and also to have a supportive label person who says, yes, this is special. I'm not gonna cut this down. I remember, I was working at Kerrang when this happened, and they were searching for an outlet to put out like a very long, maybe not the whole thing, but like a very long version of it. And I read some of it, and I was like, this is very special, but there's no way my boss is going to let me put like a 5,000 word thing up. He was like, yeah, maybe 2,000. And so I went to Adam and I was like, I can, but it's going to have to be 2,000. And he was like, I just can't do it. I'm sorry. And I thought, that's so cool. Like, I don't want to do it if it's going to be not representational of what the artist wants. So hell yeah. And I'm glad that Metal Hammer ended up taking at least a humongous chunk of it.
Yeah, I think what they ran was like a 5 or 6K version. I think the book is like 14,000 words.
Damn.
But no one would sit there and read that much on a blog anyway, I don't think. So I think the way it happened was perfect.
I'm looking forward to when I can actually sit down with like the whole book and see it with her pictures and everything. So to go back in time, just for anybody who doesn't know about Mizmor, tell me a little bit about how the project began.
The project began, I guess, leading up to it kind of throughout 2010 and 2011. I had a a conversion experience and became a Christian as a young adult. This was something that was part of my upbringing and my family for my whole life, but I rejected it as a young teen, and then had an experience where I took it seriously and it became my own and wasn't my parents' religion anymore. And I dove headfirst into that. And I went to a Bible school in Germany for 6 months. And I began to have a lot of doubts about the faith. It's kind of been a marker of my personality for a while, is anxiety and depression in this certain way where I kind of obsess and circular think about things and critical think a lot. And I don't know, maybe it's a combination of my personality with accepting dogmas, but I had a lot of wrestling and darkness in my walk with Christ. Mm-hmm. And after I came home from Germany, it was still kind of a process, but my faith slowly unraveled. And I think I practiced seriously that was like maybe a 2-year period total. But near the end of it, I was just so depressed, and I couldn't get any breakthroughs through the faith. Through doing my devotion, I would do daily devotional time of prayer and scripture and worship and whatnot. And it became so painful and frustrating that I would just feel like I'm sitting down and going through the motions every day. And it just became this really hollow, draining, legalistic feeling act that I was doing. And I was involved in a church in Portland, and I had a person I would meet with one-on-one who was, quote, discipling me. And I started, I told him all about my struggles. He was familiar with them. And I told him that I was starting to make music instead of praying and instead of reading the Bible, because it just felt like I was bashing my head against a wall and hoping that the result would be different one of these times, when it's just the same over and over again. So I had to do something different. And I told him I was making music instead, and it would end up being Mizmor. I was making this doom and black metal sounding thing to express all this pain I was feeling. And at one meeting, I told him that I was doing that, and that probably I wasn't going to want to be meeting anymore. And actually, I'm really pleasantly surprised at the advice that he gave me, because it's not very common in the church to get advice like this. But he told me that it sounded like the music I was making was the closest thing to actually worshipful heart in my life that I had, probably more so than reading the Bible and praying, as contrary as that may seem, because it just was not genuine anymore. So he encouraged me to press into my music, and I did. And we stopped meeting, and I stopped going to church. And I mean, slowly. It wasn't like he said that.
You weren't just like, cool. I'm gone.
Yeah. But I used Mizmor as an outlet to grieve my loss of faith in God. It was really painful to me. I had really fallen in love with the person of Christ as he's portrayed in the Gospels, and the brand of Christianity that I was surrounded with and brought up in. It just paints this really, gentle, meek, loving, beautiful picture of Christ. And I was taught that his Holy Spirit indwelt me, and I actually had a literal relationship with this person. Mm-hmm. So Jesus becomes your best friend and so many other things. And I really felt like I loved him. And, for whatever reason, became disillusioned with the truth of Scripture. And then you lose this relationship. And it really broke my heart. So my music's always been, I guess you could say, anti-Christian, but not in this typical Norwegian black metal sort of way. Like,
Right.
I had no anger in my heart. I just felt so deeply sad. So
You were just mourning the loss of your best friend, basically.
yeah, pretty much. And just like feeling like you don't know what's true, feeling like everything in the world that I thought is wrong. So I just felt like I had no foundation. Like if a worldview is like a castle that you build for yourself, I felt like I was just in rubble. And so I used this music as therapy to overcome my grief of my loss of faith in Christianity.
It's very apparent in your music that you were going through like a really huge and daunting thing, because the music is just so powerful and so painful, and you can really feel your pain through it. I've always been really like taken with that in your music.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's not really a question, is it? This is what I think. So can you recall for me, like, going from feeling like Christ is your best friend in the whole world, and, having a relationship with him and going to him for guidance and all that, and then to having this project where you're grieving the loss of him in your heart. That's such a huge change. So obviously it was over the course of many years, and there were many things that went into that. And you're just giving me like an in a nutshell version. But can you recall one of the first things that started to unravel your love of Christ or your belief that he was real?
Yeah, I think it was kind of twofold for me. There are a number of contradictions in the scriptures. Of a couple different kinds. There are literal contradictions where, in one book of the Bible, it gives you a count of the number of people who have died in a certain battle. And then when they retell that story in another chapter, the number is different. But you're taught that it's the inerrant word of Scripture. So like, which number is right, or how can it be right that they're both listed? Little things like that kind of concerned me at first. And then there are certain contradictions that are less obvious, like the promises of Scripture and what a believer can expect to feel and experience in their life and in their relationship with Christ, and having one picture painted in the text and then an entirely different one represented in your real life. So I think for me that the ultimate reason that I couldn't do it anymore was that I just had really bad depression. And I kept reading verses about the peace of God will guard your hearts in Christ Jesus, the peace that surpasses all understanding.
Right.
All these verses about joy and love and peace and whatnot. And I felt so alienated from that experience. That was just not happening to me. I wasn't experiencing the same thing that other believers were. And there's it was a long process still with those feelings of like, am I doing something wrong? What can I do differently? What's wrong with me? So I just started to need to try other methods to feel healthy than just pressing into Scripture, pressing into prayer, and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that took a really long time for me to be comfortable with even entertaining the idea that this could be wrong and that I should look somewhere else for help. And I wasn't the type of Christian that like wouldn't take medication or anything. I had antidepressants and whatnot. But I don't know. I think overall, if I could sum it up, it's like what the Bible says and how the world is are not the same thing. And that can be on a literal contradictory sort of place, or it can be an inner type of thing, but there's a huge cognitive dissonance that I couldn't get over. There were other things that I couldn't accept about Scripture too, but certain denominations of Christianity allow this to be. Like, for example, I never thought that it was wrong to be a homosexual. You don't have to think that to be a Christian. There's a myriad of ways to deal with that, but the scriptures do call that out as a sin. So
right.
There were a lot of things that I wrestled with, and I think overall it was my inner darkness that drove me away after a while.
That makes sense. So you talk about, how you're supposed to find peace and happiness within yourself through God, and that your mentor in the church told you it sounds like you were finding that with music. Do you feel like creating Mizmor and letting all these emotions out in your art has led you to that peace that you were trying to find with God?
Yeah, I do, but only within the last year or so.
Wow.
I don't know. I guess it's taken about 8 years from the time that I released the first Mizmor album. And when I made that album, I'd still consider myself to be a Christian at that point, just really struggling. And that album was kind of like my last prayer to God, saying, like, I really hope that you're real and that something comes of this, but this is my final prayer to you. Mm-hmm. So I still had a little bit of hope and was still struggling to understand how I could keep my faith, how it could all be real. And so from that point, it's been a slow process over the last 8 years of no longer feeling like I identify with calling myself a Christian, but not knowing what would replace that, to
right.
starting to call myself an agnostic, to only within the last year or two, I've realized that I'm totally comfortable with fully embracing the title of atheist. Mm-hmm. But it took a really long time. And now that I'm there, I finally feel a sense of closure, actually, a little, like some healing, like it. I don't know if I'd say that there's a peace that surpasses all understanding that guards my heart in the name of anything, but
right. Especially when the world is so crazy.
Yeah, I do feel quite a bit better than I felt 8 years ago.
That's amazing. And you feel like Mizmor has helped you get to that place?
Totally. I think that I think that I was traumatized by religion, by my religious upbringing and the ideas that puts in your head. Like if you're a child that thinks you're going to go to hell, for example, I think that those roots go deep in a person, and that although it's quite a bit different than other types of trauma, I do think that there was this deep pain inflicted on me that it took a long time to change, and I had to change the way that I thought about things. Mm-hmm. To experience a difference in how I felt about things, because there's just so much guilt and fear and misunderstanding that I was wrapped up in, and Mizmor was just the therapy that enabled me to understand what this is, and how to move forward from it and feel a little better. Mm-hmm. So I think I've always kind of sought out art and music for that reason, for catharsis and therapy and healing.
And your last record, A.L.N, that came out last year, I mean, cairns are like rock structures that can be like burial markers. Was the metaphor there to kind of bury God and sort of like move on now that you've gotten past that mentality?
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. To bury God. And there's one other concept talked about on the record, to bury the idea that suicide is the right way out. So the album is about recognizing the absurdity of life, that mankind continually looks for ultimate meaning in a universe that's devoid of ultimate meaning, and that is a completely absurd scenario.
Right.
You can either believe that that's not the case and that there is ultimate purpose, i.e. God, and take a leap of faith. Or you can decide that if there is no ultimate purpose, your life is not worth living anymore and you can die. Or you can embrace it for what it is and live each day in the face of the absurd.
And revel in the absurdity.
Yeah, and just go forward. And so, yeah, the idea is that the only viable option is the third one. And in order to keep walking forward, for me, I want these big landmarks that I can easily see in the distance that mark where I've been before so that I don't have to waste my time retracing my steps. So again, with like the circular thinking kind of thing, I would often revisit old doubts I've had to try to resolve them. And so I don't want to waste any more time thinking about whether or not God is real.
Right.
I'm pretty certain that he's not. And so this set up giant memorials to big reminders for yourself so that you can keep walking forward.
That's incredible. I love that. And it's so different than so many stories you hear in metal. But I feel like so many people have gone through things like that and they're able to see that in your art.
Totally.
So where along the way during this whole process did you meet Sarah Ray?
I met Sarah Ray, I think in 2011. I had just moved to Portland from Salem after returning from Germany, where I was studying the Bible.
So it was like right after that. That's amazing.
Yeah. I came back to my hometown where I was living before I left, in Salem, and me and some friends finally made the move up to Portland, which I had been wanting to do for a while. And I got a job after a little while at a coffee shop called Crema in Southeast. And through my coworkers, I met Sarah Ray. I went to a Halloween party, I think, with my friend and roommate Blake to one of my coworkers' houses. And Sarah Ray was there. And actually, Sarah Ray used to work at Crema.
Oh,
and
cool.
Over the course of our years together now, we've worked there together as coworkers. But at the time, I worked there and she didn't. But she was at the party because she had all the same coworkers in the past. And it was really interesting the night that we met because I was there with Blake and we were both doing the Christian thing together.
Interesting.
The other friends we lived with weren't, but Blake and I, we were like Christian buddies. We went to the same church. We were like super into Jesus. And we went to this party and we met Sarah Ray. And I don't know how it came up, but I think we said something about us going to church close by or something. And she said, "Oh, you go to church?" We were talking about, "Oh yeah, like we're Christians, blah, 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 blah." And she said, "Oh, that's interesting. What did she say? Something to the effect of, I'm a lesbian. What do you think about my lifestyle? Am I going to hell?" Like at this party. And we just like
amazing
looked at each other and like Blake took the lead on the answer and said something to the effect of, the scriptures call homosexuality a sin, but there's plenty of heterosexual sins as well, and I wouldn't judge one over the other, so I would just say we're all sinners or something like that. And she was like, okay, and wasn't offended. And we talked later about that, and she thought she was just so fascinated by us. She was like, look at these young, attractive, normal guys that say they're Christians. What the fuck's up with that?
In Portland, Oregon, which is such an atheist place. Right.
Yeah. So we were kind of asking for it, I guess, walking around doing our thing in the name of Christ. But that was the first time I met her, and a lot has changed since then. But yeah.
Do you remember what you guys talked about beyond that at that party?
No, that memory, I felt so uncomfortable that it eclipsed the whole night.
The anxiety has just washed away all the other memories.
Yeah.
Were you guys dressed up? You said it was a Halloween party.
Man, we probably were, but I don't have a great memory, Kat. and at that party too, like I was meeting a lot of people and trying to hanging out with my coworkers for probably the first time outside of work. So there was a lot of mingling and scattered attention and, like just being at a party with people I don't know that well. So
right.
The one thing I remember really well was meeting Sarah Ray, and that's about it.
So how did you guys end up keeping in touch after that? How did it lead to like you guys starting to go on dates?
Yeah. After a while, she started working at Crema again. After a year or two even. But I would see her now and then through like mutual friends and coworkers and stuff. But then she started to work there and we started to hang out one-on-one. She'd come over to my house after a shift and we'd just like go on a walk and drink iced coffees and chat. And
nice.
I think we just started to develop an attraction to each other, but even first and foremost as friends. I think we just kind of realized that we got along and liked how the other person thought and talked and whatnot. And that kind of grew into deeper and deeper attraction and taking things more seriously. I don't really remember us going on dates. Our dates were like her coming over and us like talking and hanging out, and one time we kissed.
I think that's probably the best kind of date because you're actually getting to know each other. And,
yeah.
It seems like you guys had a lot of profound things to talk about at that time too, considering the conversation you had when you first met her and what you were going through at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. The first time we met, she said that she was a lesbian. She really felt pressured to identify as a lesbian based on a relationship she was in at the time. Mm-hmm. She is bisexual. That was something that we talked about. We also talked about my faith. And I have this memory of us talking on my bed. And I forget how it came up. Probably it just always comes up with me because it's part of my life. But at one point I said to her like something about believing in God, wondering if she believed in God. And I gave her my answer of, I can't be certain. I really don't know. But deep down inside, I think that there is a God. And she said, oh, well, I feel exactly the opposite. And I said, oh, you mean like, that there's a God? She was like, no, like I also don't know, but deep down inside, I'm pretty sure that there's not one. And I was like, oh, and I remember feeling really disappointed because this was still like, I don't know, 2013. So I was still like falling away from God, but not totally like, I don't believe in any kind of God. We weren't talking about Christ. We were just talking about God. Right. Whatever that means.
Like the creator of the universe, whatever that means.
Just whatever that means. And I didn't even know that this type of person existed. That was just like, deep down, I'm an atheist. And I've always felt that way ever since I've been a kid. And I've tried to believe and it doesn't work. And it's just like the exact opposite of my life. And I was so perplexed that it didn't even cross my mind that this would be a response,
Right.
And now I look back on that conversation very fondly because that's like exactly how I feel now. And this whole time, Sarah's watched me slowly come to that conclusion, but she's always thought that herself. So I was perplexed as to why she would even want to talk to someone that was a Christian or believed in some idea of God. But I'm thankful that she did.
Do you feel like that was helpful to you at that time while you were grappling with all of these things to develop this deep relationship with someone who was pretty sure that there wasn't a God, so you could kind of, I don't know how to phrase it, like have her support during this time and know that you're going to be okay because you're meeting this other person that has come to terms with that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not in in such clear terms, but I think it was helpful for me just to even gain the perspective that this type of person exists and that they're a good person. Most of the people in my life, you know, I'm still like 21, 22 at this point, like growing up around a lot of other people that also grew up in the church or, you know, have pretty just also agnostic friends. I don't think I had anyone in my life that was like, no, I'm an atheist. If any of my friends didn't believe in God, they were like, yeah, I just don't really know. I don't really think about it. Who cares?
Right. Why are you asking me this question?
Yeah. Or they were other people like me that were somewhere on the spectrum of like, that's what my parents believe. Either like, fuck that, or yeah, maybe, or just somewhere, you know, other people that have fallen away from a faith and are hurt. So someone that's like never been a Christian, never wants to be a Christian, was like, whoa, just fascinating to me. Yeah. And just to get the perspective, you know.
Were you taught before that atheists were potentially bad people and that you should avoid them?
No, I wasn't taught that. But I think as Christians, we're all kind of like scared of atheists in a certain way. Like
they might like tempt you away from your faith.
Yeah. Which is very telling, actually. Like, oh, they might say something to convince you of otherwise.
They might give you some empirical evidence.
Right. They might talk about science. I think that I thought that atheists were confused and lost, and that there was some sort of embitterment, like rebellion against God. Like, yeah, deep down inside, you know he's real. You're just choosing not to believe in him because you're a badass or something, you know. But that there would be an actual pure standpoint of just, no, I just don't believe in it.
Right. Like this calm, like understanding of just like, nope, not for me.
Right. And the realization that for that person, that standpoint has no moral implications. That person doesn't believe that therefore they're going to hell or are bad or lost or whatever. So you can't appeal to them on that level.
Right.
How their opinion is their opinion. To answer your question, I wasn't taught that atheists were bad or anything. I don't think that I needed to be. I think we all were like, we got to save the atheists. You know, it's kind of the unspoken.
Let's help them.
Yeah.
Let's guide them so that they can go to heaven too.
Yeah. They're the most lost, the most confused. They need love and light in their life the most out of anyone. Kind of beware, but not like they're bad or anything.
Mm-hmm. And then here you find yourself falling in love with a person who is one of those people. That's such a wonderful, beautiful, crazy thing to have happen.
I agree. I'm really thankful for that.
During that time, when you were starting to lose your faith and you were starting to dismantle your beliefs, how did she provide support to you?
Really just being there. I don't remember us having so specific of talks throughout the journey of like, this is where I'm at right now. This is what I'm struggling with right now with in regards to the faith and whatnot. I was just pouring that into Mizmor. So I think it was more in the background of just being able to hang out with this person, being able to talk to this person without being judged, and to actually feel like it's genuine. That, because speaking as a former Christian, there are plenty of people with radically different worldviews that a Christian would want to hang out with and have the appearance of not judging, but for the sake of getting closer to, so that one day they might be converted. Even if you're not consciously thinking that, you're subconsciously thinking that, because, I mean, it's actually, you're doing a good thing, quote unquote, in terms of that belief system, because you think that person's going to go to hell. So if you
I'm
had
leading
the knowledge
them to salvation.
Yeah, exactly. But so to just have there not really be any motive, but hey, you know, it's good to hang out and chat and be friends. I think that was just really comforting to me, and she was just fascinating to me. So, and to have us slowly build a foundation for our relationship that went from acquaintances to coworkers to close friends to romantic interest, that slow kind of gradual thing just, I think, made us have a strong, genuine relationship in the long run.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I've always been really curious about is if so much of the time when we hear about Christianity and pop culture having to do with relationships, we hear about things like the sanctity of marriage, or like things in the Bible that say that women have to be subservient to men, or, what's moral as far as dating, like if you should have sex before marriage or not, things like that. Do you feel like you experienced any teachings either when you were growing up in the church or when you were studying the Bible in Germany that taught you about what a relationship should look like?
Yeah, totally. Even as I'd say, even just growing up, having all that stuff in the background, not necessarily being aware that I was being taught something specific about how relationships should work, but just kind of all the background noise of growing up the way I did. I think it kind of instilled at least a strong sense of devotion in a relationship, usually specifically seen in working towards having a monogamous marriage of a relationship. Mm-hmm. And so I think that I kind of was shaped with this idea. I was never taught that women are to be subservient to men, but you read that in the scriptures, and the vibe is kind of there. And I appreciate having, a strong sense of loyalty and devotion instilled in me in regards to relationships. That's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. But
totally,
there was also a lot of pressure. Like, for example, like dating as a teen. And you said it, like, no sex before marriage. That was a thing that I rebelled against. And when I was a young teen, I felt guilty about it, definitely, but it wasn't causing me lots of distress. But as an older teen and in my early 20s, when I was devoutly pursuing the Lord of my own accord, I was in a Christian relationship with a girl that I loved. And when we would have sex, I would have to pray for forgiveness like all the time, and I felt so rotten all the time. And so we're constantly fighting this war of like the flesh versus the spirit. And, that puts a lot of pressure on you to like get married right away so that you're allowed to have sex.
Totally.
And that can, that's not those aren't good circumstances under which to get married. I think that a lot of people mistakenly or get married to people that aren't going to be good choices, marital choices for them in the long run, just because they want to, not just have sex, but like have this marriage that you're supposed to have. There's tons of language in the scriptures about the church being the bride of Christ. And you kind of don't feel complete as a believer until you have this spouse that's doing this walk with Christ with you. That kind of completes the picture. So you're desperately searching for that. And there's just so much pressure and guilt and misguided ideas around that. I like to ramble a little bit here. It became
ramble all you want.
It became a real issue with this Christian relationship I was in, because we felt like we were called to one another. And through the course of our relationship, like even when I was living in Germany for 6 months studying the Bible and we were doing long distance thing, like whenever we would have problems, the answer was always, well, we're supposed to be together. And, there was a time early on when like that was endearing and maybe served to strengthen us. But after a while, when we were dealing with, just the intrinsic properties of each of our personalities being incongruent, meaning maybe we actually shouldn't be together, we don't work together that great as a romantic couple, we always would shove those things down and say, well, God confirmed, I was praying about it and God confirmed to me yet again that we're supposed to be together. However, we felt that happened.
Right.
And so there was so much needless, it was dragged out. And we're still friends. This person's a great person. I love them for who they are, but I couldn't see that we aren't that compatible as partners because I was blinded by this idea that it's meant to be. And I think that's another idea that I got in my childhood, not just from Christianity and religion, probably from some other things too, just in the culture surrounding it. But I always thought, there's a purpose for everything. Everything happens for a reason. Even when I was a really little kid, I believed in soulmates, and I thought that this person and I were supposed to be together, like that's a thing, And we were just in pain for way too long because of our stubbornness of our belief in, in this circumstance, in Christianity.
Right. It's interesting you mention that idea is prevalent outside of Christianity too, because I feel like so many people, especially even in like Disney movies and stuff growing up, are indoctrinated into this idea that there's one person out there that is your soulmate, and you're gonna search for that person until you find each other, and then it's just gonna click, and then that's just gonna be magical forever, and
right.
It's just gonna be like your destiny.
Right. Yeah. So, that's a great example. It's all around us. I think it was kind of reinforced in the background through Christianity. But yeah, that's a really bad way to continue on a relationship when it clearly, no pun intended, isn't meant to be.
Right. Well, especially when then if you break up with that person and you still believe that way of life, then that means that you've already found your person, and then now there's no one because it didn't work out with that one person. And you probably live with a considerable amount of like shame.
Yeah, there's that route, or that you were just wrong the whole time and
Totally.
Not hearing God correctly, and you're, coming to him in prayer the wrong way, not listening the right way. I don't know, a whole bunch. Everything's just guilt.
Yes. Yeah, the weight of guilt will lead people to do so much crazy shit.
Yeah, I agree.
So when you say you felt like you were called together or toward one another, what did that feel like? Like what in prayer, what were you hearing that made you realize that?
Early on, like my hindsight, my relationship with this person is what drew me to start an adult relationship with Christ. This person wanted to do that first, has a similar background as me, and was having their own stirrings as to wanting to come back to the faith as an adult and take it seriously. And we were already dating, and I don't know how to describe it other than it just sounded like a good idea to me, like something I would try. And it was a slow process of like going back to church, and I felt angry at first, but I was there, and I thought that was a good step. And just like all these tiny little, it's a mix of gut intuitions and coincidences that happen that lead a person to think that God's hand is guiding their path. And to give you one specific example, later on when I was in Germany, we'd already been together for a while, and we were having problems staying together. I sought the Lord in prayer with the scriptures and did something that you're not supposed to do, which is kind of play roulette with the Bible and just flip it open and read something and read into that. Like God's telling you something because, I mean, it's almost like really a cult because
Right.
I found this page and I'm reading this thing right now. So that must be what's supposed to be happening.
It's like a complex Ouija board.
Yeah. And I even knew in the moment that that's not how you're supposed to do it. But I was just at wit's end and I was crying and praying, and I flipped open the Bible just to hope that I could just read something that would help. And the first thing I saw was a chapter about, I think it was the Apostle Paul sailing on the Adriatic Sea. And my girlfriend at the time, her name is the first part of that word, Adria.
Wow.
And you don't see that word any other time in the Bible. It's just talking about this one event. And so I just thought, okay, well, I know that this isn't supposed to mean anything because I'm doing the whole random chance scriptural approach, but like that's too big of a coincidence. There's just one more time that when I'm asking for help, God's confirming I should be with this person.
That's pretty wild, though.
I mean, yeah, but wild things happen all the time. Coincidences happen all the time.
That is very true. But I'm sure at that moment, you were overcome with like, holy shit, that is incredible.
Yeah, but I mean, the list of things that people do because they think that God told them that, or that they feel like God's on their side or God spoke to them, it's atrocious.
Right. And there's like a psychological phenomenon that when you go looking for something, you're going to find it.
Yes, absolutely. Very much self-fulfilling prophecy vibes.
Right. Like a confirmation bias type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you don't get your bias confirmed, if you're really seeking that hard, you'll read into the results somehow, even if it says the opposite message, then that's a sign that I'm doing something wrong or whatever. Like, and you put the moment on a pedestal and you extrapolate from it what you think God's telling you. And it's just like, what if he's telling you nothing? What if he doesn't exist? What if this is all in your head?
Right. And you're saying it to yourself.
Yeah.
So now that you're in a non-Christian relationship as a person who identifies as being an atheist, do you feel like your approach to relationships are different now, or that you've erased some of the things that you used to believe or think?
Yeah, I think that my relationship now is much more reasonable, phlegmatic. I think that I don't have this idea that I'm supposed to be with anyone or called to be with anyone. So being with someone is a mutual choice, and you either want it or it's good for you or it's working or positive or whatever, or not. And I mean, it doesn't take away the pain and the struggle of what it is to work through and be in a long committed relationship, but it removes this illusion that there's some force guiding it. And I think that's kind of a game changer for how you approach a lot of things.
Yeah, that's really profound. Like the idea that choosing something is a lot more powerful than it just being a random chance. So back to the story of Sarah Ray. Can you recall the moment where you first realized you were in love with her?
Yeah. Well, I can recall the moment that she told me she realized she was in love with me. And I do recall the moment for me as well. But for her, I would share my lyrics with her. I would burn a new Mizmor song I was working on a CD and like give her the lyrics to it. Or this other band I was in at the time called Urzite, I gave her all the lyrics to that, because that was really, as opposed to Mizmor, it was less pining and sad and more just like irreverent and insane. And so the lyrics were a little bit more abrasive, and I felt like for some reason she could relate to one of the songs. And I gave her the lyrics, and she told me later that when she was reading the Urzite lyrics, which is like just nasty black metal music, that was the moment she realized that she loved me.
That's incredible.
And the moment I realized I loved her was she was over at my house, and we had kind of figured out that we were romantically interested in one another. But for the past while in her life, she had lived in a polyamorous relationship. And I told her that I wasn't interested in that, and that if we wanted to do something romantic, I wanted to be monogamous. And she told me that she would consider trying that for me. And
amazing.
Instead of, right, it was amazing. And instead of being stoked, I overthought it and complicated it, and and pressed her on it of like, what does that mean? Sort of like, why can't I get a better answer from you or something?
Right.
And,
not like I'll consider it.
Right. And she,
if you're lucky,
she got upset and she left my house. And sitting there on the bed, realizing how upset I was that I just blew this thing and we won't be having a relationship now, I think was the moment I realized I loved her.
Wow. That's really cool.
It's like, oh, damn it. What did I just do? Why can't I just be simple and say, okay?
Because you were being honest and true to yourself and stating your needs, and that's very important.
Yeah.
How did you guys end up resolving that?
It just resolved itself. We talked about it. She was like, yeah, it kind of pissed me off that I just made this big concession for you, and you were like concerned about it, and it wasn't good enough for you. And it's like, yeah, I get that. And we just tried again. And yeah, we've been together for 6 years now.
Wow. That's amazing. I love that it started with a foundation of honesty, even if it leads to a bad conversation.
Yeah, that's I think that's important to both of us. And I think we're also both pretty emotional and fairly transparent. So lying can only go so far.
Right. So what kinds of things has she taught you about yourself since then?
Oh boy. She has taught me, what has she taught me about myself? She's taught me that sometimes I'm not paying attention and listening when I think that I am. And that there's a lot that it's really worthwhile to pay close attention to the moment. She's taught me that I'm probably more traumatized than I realize in my life. And she's taught me to approach things with curiosity instead of judgment. And I think that has been a really important lesson to my relationships with everyone. The less judgmental I can be, and I'm certainly still a student in this, but the more just genuinely curious I can be about where another person's coming from instead of taking the leap and then judging that, the better it is for that relationship.
Yeah, I think that's really incredible. Like that a romantic relationship can teach you those things about yourself that you can apply to everyone in the whole world, or being present in a moment. Yeah,
absolutely. It's kind of like a relationship like that, especially when you live together and whatnot. It's kind of like a little time capsule or whatnot. It like you'll learn all the things that you need to improve about your relationships with all your friends and family members through this relationship with this person you're super close with and never apart from.
Right? It's like a mirror.
It speeds the whole thing up. Yeah.
That's so cool. And so you create at home a lot. I can see like you have your amps and your soundproofing of some kind behind you.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're writing music and stuff like that, how do you say you want to be present in the moment and everything? How do you communicate? Like, today I am going to go create. I'm going to go make Mizmor stuff. I'm going to go focus on that today, and I can't be present for you.
Well, it's only really been an issue, I guess, since quarantine, because for the past couple of years, I've worked from home doing, using my office. It's like an office studio space. So it's where I record and write music. It's where we have band practice. It's where I ship merch from. It's like if I can put all the things related to Mizmor that I have to do into one room so that it doesn't have to spill out into the rest of the house, that would probably be the best. So I have my zone that I go in. But up until, all this virus stuff started, she went to work every day, works 40 hours a week. So it wasn't really an issue. I'd just work from home and she'd come home and then we'd both be done working and we'd start hanging out. But now she has to work from home too. So I guess that's the answer. It's not really a problem because she has to work too. I'm always working when she's working. And when she's home and not working, I feel like I can't work because I want to know what she's doing. I want to go hang out with her and stuff.
That's really sweet.
So yeah, it's much easier for me to work when she's not around. But
yeah, I can imagine that. How has quarantine affected your relationship? Have you guys gotten sick of each other and had to be like, I need to go be in the other part of the house, or has it been okay?
It's been mostly okay. I mean, for me as a person, and she knows this, I'm fairly introverted, and I define that as meaning that I recharge energy by being alone. I like to be around other people. It's not that I don't like to socialize. I don't think that that's really what the word means, but that I have to get by myself and chill out and find my center to feel like a person again after being around people for a while. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, in this time of quarantine, I've reached a couple points where I just feel like I need alone time, but it's not personal,
right?
Against her or anything. It's just I need to hear nothing for a while and just be alone with my thoughts, or try to get to a place where I don't have thoughts or whatever, need to disappear for a little while. So I've struggled with that a little bit, but nothing major. It's pretty chill.
I feel like there's a misconception about what the word introversion means. I know so many introverts that are extremely social and outgoing people. They just also need to recharge.
Right. Yeah, I don't even know if that's if my definition for it is the correct definition for it, but I've started to adopt that because it makes the most sense to me, and how to let other people know how I am.
How have there been times when you've struggled with that, or communicating your needs regarding that?
Oh, sure. I think that, especially, I think the worst case scenario for me is being on tour. It's great. I mean, there's so much about it that I love, don't get me wrong, but it's incredibly bittersweet and exhausting. And I think I get the most distraught and emotional in those circumstances where not only am I around people 24/7, but there's all these other layers of discomforts and unhealthy lifestyle on top of it that's imposed upon you,
and constant overstimulation and people around you and no alone time.
Exactly, yeah. So I think I kind of reach my breaking point in those moments more.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So speaking of tour, I realize you don't tour a ton with Mizmor, but when you have gone on tours and whatnot, how do you and Sarah Ray figure out your communication when you're gone for weeks at a time?
We mainly text, and every once in a while do a phone call and a FaceTime call. She's pretty autonomous. We both start to miss each other and need the communication, obviously. And at different points in our relationship on different tours, it's been different, where I've needed her more or vice versa. But I think now that we've been together for longer and I've gone on tour more times, we've kind of settled into we'll be off and on texting all day, and then every 2 days or so have a voice or face call. I'm not the type that wants to, I don't really like talking on the phone. And I know that texting is a terrible way of communicating, but I just feel awkward on the phone. It's always like given me a certain amount of stress. So I kind of try to put it off, but then we like obviously need to talk, and
Right.
it's great to talk. But yeah, I think I'll call her like every 2 days instead of every day.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
How do you handle it when there's a disproportionate situation? I guess disproportionate is not the right word, but an uneven situation where you need her and she doesn't need you currently, or vice versa. How do you communicate that?
Just cry.
That makes sense.
I don't know. Usually some type of conversation that has emotion in it that lets the other person know and draws out their empathy. We don't really fight. We have fought, but it's not common. It's more just like, I'm sad. Why can't you tell? You're not giving me what I need. And then, oh, I'm sorry. And then it's fine.
That's a beautiful thing when there can be that. Recognizing crying is like a signifier of you need my empathy right now, as opposed
Absolutely.
to why are you crying? This is bullshit.
Yeah. There's nothing more to say. I'm just crying right now.
It's like, obviously you're feeling huge emotions. So it's manifesting itself this way.
Right. And it's at those moments where it does me better to suspend judgment and become curious about what's going on. And that usually makes me care a lot about what's going on, instead of thinking about, what do I need? How is this affecting me? This is so
Right.
uncool, or just
Why
whatever.
are you doing this to me?
Exactly.
As opposed to like, I wonder why this person is expressing themselves this way. Maybe I should ask them.
Yes. Maybe I'm
that's
causing
a really
it.
huge, yeah, totally. That's a really huge thing to realize. I mean, 6 years is a long time to be with somebody, and that's a humongous thing to recognize about yourself, and to recognize how it's helping not only your life, but like these little situations that pop up in various types of communication or environments.
Yeah, sure. I think I've tried recently. I'm not very good at it, but I'm trying to meditate more and cultivate more of a mindfulness skill, just for the sole purpose that I think it makes me a better friend and lover and just whatever, to increase my focus, to just make me better for other people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a very crazy question for you. I was thinking about this, when you're describing like the profound love of being enamored with the idea of Christ and the falling in love with religion and all of the huge emotions that come with that. And you've also experienced this deep romantic love with a person for 6 years. Aside from like the surface level things like lust and sexual feelings and stuff like that, how do you think the two feelings of love compare?
Of love for Christ versus love for Sarah Ray?
Right.
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting question. I'm not sure.
I warned you.
I'm not sure that they do compare, in the sense that my love for Christ was proved to be fantastical. And I think in that sense, it was more of a passion, of an infatuation, I guess, like an obsession with an idea, than you find in actually living in loving relationship with another human being. I'd say they're nothing alike, because Christ never shares his emotions with you or his thoughts with you, tells you what he needs from you. It's a one-way street.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally silent on the other end. And you just kind of make guesses and inferences and have intuitions about your feelings and thoughts when you're praying that you mistake for God communicating with you. So you really have a relationship with yourself that you're forming around the narrative of a person in a book. So it seems really kind of I guess now that I'm talking about it, seems really selfish and gross in this way. Like at the time I felt like I was in love with Christ, but, learning that there is no real Holy Spirit with which I am communing, that's part of
what does that leave you with?
Yeah, the earth-shattering revelation of like, well, then what the fuck have I been doing? So yeah, I much prefer living in this loving relationship with Sarah Ray, because otherwise, I don't know. It's almost like when I was a Christian, it was just there's almost a sense of like philosophical masturbation about it, where it's just like it's just ideas. You're just by yourself thinking about ideas. I mean, you live in fellowship with other believers and you congregate and whatnot, but like the substance of your conviction is in your inner life. And that's just ends up being the hollow substance in there. It's weird. To try to answer your question better, it was my relationship with Christ wasn't real, and my relationship with Sarah Ray is real.
Well, I like both versions of your answer, the very, very beautiful one and the very succinct one. It's a really profound realization. I never really thought about that way either. Like that you're kind of developing a relationship with yourself during that.
I mean, only non-believers would see it that way, but
right, of course.
But yes, it's all just in your brain,
right? So, I read your metal injection interview with Cody.
Oh, nice!
I love Cody, so shout out to Cody. You said in that interview that creating has given you a new sense of purpose, kind of that has filled the hole where God used to be. But you also said with A.L.N that it was kind of like putting a marker there to end your mourning for God, because you're burying it in the past, you're moving on, you've reached that sense of peace. So if that is all in the past now, then what can we expect from Mizmor now? And what are you going to be creating in the future?
That's a great question. In general, I would say I don't know. But I've done a couple interviews actually around A.L.N where I've expressed this idea of like there's finality in the album, and there's some amount of healing within myself that, like, in a sense, a lot of this project has served its purpose, because Mizmor in specific I use for this one purpose. So I've thought at times that it would be possible that I wouldn't need to make another album, but I'll never close the book, because you just never know. And I've always needed, the one thing I know about myself is that I've always needed to create music to deal with what I'm experiencing. So it just may be that Mizmor evolves and isn't about God anymore, or I'm not really sure. I can give you a tiny little snippet of a secret that I can't flesh out too much, but
awesome.
I've been wondering this myself, this question, and since quarantine, I've actually been working with another artist on a musical collaboration.
Hell yeah!
So I'm excited about that, and I've never ever thought that Mizmor would have any collaborative element to it, because it's like my journal. And, I like being in bands with other people or playing other people's music and stuff too, but there's really no room in Mizmor to have someone else's influence. But to mash up its sound with another sound is something I hadn't really considered before. And I wish I could say more about it, but there's stuff happening. There's still music that's going to come out. I think it's just going to keep evolving as I keep changing and aging. I don't know. Like, should you call it something else if it's not about the same thing anymore? These are the questions I ask myself, but I think, at least for now, I'm going to keep rolling with Mizmor and just create as I need to create. And I'm not really sure what that is going to look like or sound like in the future.
I think there are always more absurdities in life for you to talk about. And I mean, we're talking about love. I feel like love is just as absurd as all of these things. Like the idea that we find a person that we're in love with and that we partner up with and live and coexist with in the world when everything is bananas.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think that it's just part of who I am to make sense of, to process things. I need to make art and music. And I don't think there's an end to that in sight. I don't always know what it'll be called or sound like or whatnot, but I need this. It's part of who I am.
So what would be your advice to people who want to have a happy, lasting, respectful relationship?
Man, my advice would be probably indicative of the response I gave earlier. I think that one of the most valuable things you can do in a relationship is not be judgmental. Just try to be curious and give the person the benefit of the doubt and practice empathy and humility and hope for the best.
And if they cry, be curious about why.
Yeah. And if you're both acting in that way, being curious and non-judgmental, and it's still problematic, then you might try to find someone else.
That also makes a lot of sense.
Be honest with yourself, be honest with the other person.
That's really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all that with me. And
of course. Thank you for having me.
It's delightful to talk to you. This episode of Hot Blooded was hosted, written, and produced by me, Kat Jones. It was edited and co-produced by Evan Dulaney, and the theme song was written by Jordan Olds. The logo was made by Corey Largent, who goes by Insane Clam Pasta on Instagram, and additional graphics were made by Jonathan Amaya. Thank you so much to everyone who subscribed on Patreon, but especially those who subscribed to the Lover tier: Janet Talenko-Davis, Mark Bassett, Rob Menzer, Ryan Carty, Ronnie Rodriguez, and the band Drug Salad. If you love this podcast and want me to keep making these, I would love it if you subscribed on Patreon. It helps pay for the hosting fees, the equipment, and a bunch of other things we need to keep this running smoothly. And we donate 20% of the money every month to an organization fighting for racial equality. As I said earlier, this month it's the Okra Project. You can find it at patreon.com/hotbloodedpodcast. If you ever want to shoot us a tip but don't want to subscribe, you can always Cash App us at hotbloodedpodcast. To learn more about the show, head to hotbloodedpodcast.com. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or love letters, you can send them to me at hotbloodedpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again so much. We will see you next week.